back to Inside Politics. Our guest today, State Representative Mike Sparks from the Smyrna area. Representative Sparks, have you mended or repaired your relationships with members of the Black Caucus? You told me off camera that you had been one who had stood up with them last year when there was an issue down in the Murfreesboro area regarding some children being arrested.
Yes, I just
left. You have not damaged that relationship.
Well, a couple of them were probably a little mad, and one came over to me the other day. He said, "I think it was just a mistake." And I said, "You're mad at me?" He says, "No, I'm not mad." I said, "Yeah, you are. You're mad." You know, but this discussion about history, I think, should be out there, and it shouldn't be. History shouldn't be controversial. Truth shouldn't be controversial. But back what you mentioned, last year I did stand with the Black Caucus. I think I'm the first Republican that they know of that stood with the Black Caucus. And the irony with that was, one, I knew there was a reason for me standing with the Black Caucus, bigger than at that time. I knew it had to be something for something like this today. I stood with them because of the young boys that were arrested at the Hobgood Elementary School. I happened to be running a bill on juvenile justice. You know, if a 5-year-old or a 17-year-old is arrested, they don't have to contact their parents or have an attorney present. And I think it's an issue that needs to be addressed. I didn't have the support on that bill. I probably had the support from the Black Caucus on that bill overwhelmingly. But when they asked me to stand with them, you know, I stood with them, and it was kind of odd. No one criticized me for standing with them. Earlier, I just seen Jim Henry, the chief of staff for the governor, and you know, went to his wife's funeral. And oddly enough, I drove Senator Thelma Harper there. You know, it was kind of strange, and we stopped and ate at Cracker Barrel, and she's supposed to come eat at my mother-in-law's house. And you know, folks know Senator Harper, I call her a country girl, and my mother-in-law is a pretty good cook, so she's supposed to come over, and I said, "You want some real good cooking, you come to my mother-in-law." So she's supposed to come up to my mother-in-law's. But it is kind of strange, but this is what saddens me with the media today, Pat, is that, you know, they've really, in my opinion, created fake news.
Well, what have you heard from your constituents? You have a fairly significant African-American and Hispanic population.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I have almost 10,000.
What's the reaction been?
Well, I just left a prayer vigil just now, and they asked me to speak, and it was an African American pastor, Pastor Brenda Bryant, that put it together. And sadly, her church burned down 2 years ago, and Channel 5 covered it. And I helped her with a GoFundMe project, and also helped another African American church, Word of Life, that was literally locked out by the city over an easement dispute for 2 years. And Pat, the strange thing with this, and this is what I want your viewers to know, I had to beg a journalist to cover a black church that was locked out for 2 years. I wrote to NAACP. I never heard from him. I told Heidi Weinberg with ACLU, I said, "How come you didn't come to their defense?" They were locked out for 2 years. A white church, Giles Creek Baptist, Pat, built this church in Laverne. Sadly enough, they're out $56,000 in mortgage payments. I called the pastor from the House floor about 1.5 years ago or 2 years ago. I said, Pastor Wellington Johnson. I said, Pastor, where are you at? What's the latest on your church? He says, I think I'm gonna let it go. I said, you can't let your church go. That's where we're at today. Our Constitution, the First Amendment right, I should be able to honor a pastor without controversy. That black church shouldn't be locked out. It was locked out. So all this gets down to the First Amendment, going back what I said, what George Orwell talked about.
Seems to me almost every year, these last few years, the General Assembly has gotten into some controversy surrounding the Civil War. There's been the Nathan Bedford Forrest bust, there have been other things. Why is that?
Well, this is the first controversy I've ever been involved in, you know.
And you hope the last?
Yes, sir. Well, it won't be the last. But, you know, the sad thing about it, I'm really closer with some of the members of the Black Caucus, oddly enough, and Representative Joe Towns, who I think the world of Joe. He sits in front of me. I think the world of Larry Miller, G.A. Hardaway, Antonio Parkinson. And they know I'm passionate about history. But about a month ago, we honored the Memphis Belle. You know, we made that the official aircraft for the state of Tennessee. Well, my dad flew 24 bombing raids in a B-17 over Germany, was shot down once, crash landed twice, and the B-17s that was a training base. Smyrna Airport was a training base where I was born. So that's why I care about this. Well, I stood up on the House floor and said, Nathan Bedford Forrest's great-grandson was shot down over Germany in a B-17, piloting a B-17. Folks don't know this. Well, Joe was a little upset about it, and I said, Joe, this is just history. You can't get upset with history. This is the truth. And if we're going to put we can't put a false narrative out there, because these young people today, if they keep hearing these false narratives, no wonder we have division in the streets. Maybe if people knew the truth, maybe people wouldn't be so divisive today.
But you knew that Nathan Bedford Forrest's name alone would be a flashpoint for any legislation that talked about him. Usually an ounce of sugar is the better way to go at it. Do you wish you had gone back and talked to some people and explained what you were trying beforehand?
So I met with the Black Caucus. I met with the Black Caucus.
And?
So I separated the resolution. I totally separated. So this whole controversy is not about Nathan Bedford Forrest. Really, the controversy boils down to me recognizing an author who wrote a book, and he's a Christian. He happened to write a book.
It was the subject of his book, not the author himself.
But that shouldn't be, under our First Amendment, Pat, that should not be a problem. I have another book that I'm recognizing a gentleman. He doesn't know I'm doing it. I have the book here. He won't know, he doesn't know about this resolution till probably next week. It's a surprise. He happened to write a column about Forrest last month. So do we ban his book now? If we're going to ban this guy's book, do we ban this next journalist's book? Or are we going to ban Pat Nolan down the road because you covered somebody who's controversial? That's where these things are going.
One of those you mentioned earlier was Sam Davis. For people who don't know, he was known as the boyhood hero of the Confederacy.
Yes, sir.
He was hung by the North as a spy after he was captured and refused to release any information.
Yes, sir.
What has made him such an enduring Civil War figure, at least in Tennessee?
Well, you know, that story, it's close to my heart. You mentioned you had some field trips there. Well, I was the only kid in my 4th grade class that didn't get to go to the field trip. I didn't have the $5. And that always stuck with me. And the strange thing that was strange, a TA member reached out to me, a teacher at my old school, took me to my same classroom. She didn't know about this, that I didn't get to go to this field trip. After I was at that classroom about 4 years ago, I was speaking at War Memorial, introducing Douglas Henry, the late Douglas Henry, on behalf of the 150th anniversary of Sam Davis. So I was thrilled about that. But what always stuck with me is probably being that young 4th grader that didn't get to go to this field trip. And to some people, it may be like, well, Mike, you need to get over that. But those things stick with you in life. Your background shapes the things that you are passionate about. I'm passionate about history, passionate about many other issues, and the Sam Davis home is just basically a focal point for the town of Smyrna, and it's something that needs to be remembered. We were able to help them with a grant from the state, Senator Kitchen and I, for $10,000 to try to help with the home, keeping it in good shape. But it's something we do need to remember.
Representative Mike Sparks is our guest on Inside Politics. We've been talking about the state legislature and the Civil War. They're two different things. They're 150 years apart, but there's still controversy over both. We'll be back in just a few minutes to continue our conversation.